My name is Ethan Miller. Most folks back in Oakhaven probably think I'm a bit strange, and maybe they're right. While they're settling down with families, mortgages, and 9 to 5s, I'm usually stuffing a worn backpack with camera gear, water bottles, and maybe a granola bar that's seen better days, heading out towards the places most people actively avoid. It's not just hiking for me. It's the allure of the forgotten. The silent stories held within decaying wood and crumbling stone. I'm an amateur photographer, sure, but maybe more accurately, I'm a collector of echoes, drawn to the eerie beauty of abandonment. And there's no place richer in echoes, or more thoroughly abandoned, than the deep, tangled expanse locals call Briarwood Forest. Briarwood isn't on any official map with that name. It's just a vast tract of unincorporated state land, mostly secondary or tertiary growth forest that swallowed up old logging tracts and hard, scrabble farms generations ago. It sprawls for miles west of the county line, a dense wall of oak, maple, and pine, threaded through with thorny underbrush that seems to actively resist intrusion. Hence the local moniker, I suppose. It's the kind of place where sunlight struggles to reach the forest floor, even at noon, where the air always feels a few degrees cooler, damp with the smell of moss and decay. It's beautiful in a severe, indifferent sort of way. But it also has a reputation. People get lost in Briarwood. Not frequently, maybe 1 or 2 hikers every few years, usually unprepared folks who wander off the barely marked trails near the edges. But the stories that linger, the ones whispered over beers at the VFW hall, or murmured by old timers on their porches, are darker. Tales of hunters who went in and never came out, leaving behind only a strangely empty campsite. Rumors of odd lights seen flickering deep within the trees at night. Stories of sounds that don't belong, whispers on the wind when there's no one else around, or a chilling mimicry of a human voice calling from just beyond sight. Most people dismiss it as local folklore, campfire spook stories, but spend enough time on the fringes of Briarwood, like I have, photographing old barns collapsing near its edge, and you start to feel it. A certain weight, a stillness that feels less like peace and more like watchfulness. My specific obsession, the reason I was pushing deeper into Briarwood than I ever had before on that crisp, late October afternoon, was the legend of the Holloway Place. It wasn't a grand estate, just an old homestead, supposedly built by one of the original settling families back in the late 1800s. The Holloways, the story went, were reclusive, sticking to their isolated patch deep in the woods, rarely coming into town. Then, sometime in the early 1920s, they just vanished. No note, no sign of struggle, no indication they'd packed up and left. One day the smoke stopped rising from their chimney, and the few neighbors scattered miles away eventually. A cursory search found the cabin seemingly undisturbed, food half eaten on the table, tools leaning where they'd been left. But the family, Jedidiah, his wife Martha, and their 3 young children were gone. Naturally, theories abounded. Animal attack, unlikely for a whole family indoors. Full play from outsiders. Possible, but remote as they were, who would even know they were there? The darker whispers hinted at something else. That Jedidiah had dabbled in things he shouldn't have, strange rituals learned from older, more secretive communities rumored to have existed, even deeper in the hills. That something within Briarwood itself had claimed them. Of course, it was all hearsay, embellished over a century. But the core mystery remained: a family disappeared from a locked house in the middle of nowhere. I'd heard variations of the tale since I was a kid, but it wasn't until old Mr. Abernathy, the town's unofficial historian, showed me a brittle, hand-drawn map from the 1930s that my interest truly ignited. It was a crude thing, sketched by a hunter, marking deer stands and creek crossings. But there, deep in a section marked only as Thick Briar, was a small square labeled Holloway Ruin. Abernathy claimed the hunter who drew it swore the place felt wrong, that he'd heard children crying near there when no children could possibly be around. He never went back. Finding that ruin became my goal. Not just for the photos, though the thought of capturing such a legendary, forgotten place made my photographer's heart beat faster, but to see it for myself. To stand where they stood, to feel the atmosphere. Maybe even find some clue, however small, to what really happened. Was it just a tragic, unexplained disappearance? Or was there something more to the Briarwood whispers? The hike-in was arduous. The trailhead, such as it was just a muddy pull, off on a rarely used logging road about 5 miles past the last paved county route. My beat, up Tacoma, barely handled the ruts. From there, the path was faint, marked only by the occasional, faded blaze on a tree trunk, likely left by hunters years ago. Within an hour, even those vanished. I was relying on a compass, the hand-drawn map Abernathy had let me copy, and a good deal of guesswork. The woods pressed in close. The canopy overhead was thick, filtering the mid-afternoon sun into a dim greenish twilight. The air was still and heavy. The usual forest sounds, birdsong, chattering squirrels. The buzz of insects seemed muted, almost absent. All I could hear was the crunch of my own boots on the thick carpet of fallen leaves, my breathing, and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere off in the dense undergrowth. That sound always made me pause, scan the trees, heart thumping a little faster. Probably just a deer, I'd tell myself. Or a raccoon. But the silence that followed always felt expectant. I checked my compass frequently, trying to maintain a generally westward direction, navigating around impenetrable thickets of rhododendron and thorny vines that snagged at my clothes. Briarwood lived up to its name. Progress was slow. The terrain undulated, forcing me down into damp, mossy hollows thick with ferns, then back up steep inclines littered with loose rocks. Several times, I had to backtrack, finding my chosen route, blocked by sheer rock faces or swampy ground, where black water oozed between clumps of sphagnum moss. It was during one of these detours, pushing through a particularly dense stand of young pines, that I felt the first real prickle of unease. It wasn't a sound or something I saw. It was a feeling, the distinct, primal sensation of being watched. I stopped dead, straining my ears. Just the sigh of the wind high up in the pine needles. The air felt colder here, the shadows deeper. I slowly turned, scanning the trees around me. My hand hovering near, the canister of bear spray on my belt more for peace of mind than any real expectation of needing it. There was nothing. Just endless trees, standing silent and sentinel. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. Just nerves, Ethan. I muttered aloud, the sound of my own voice startlingly loud in the stillness. You're deep in the woods, alone. It's natural. But the feeling lingered. A cold weight in the pit of my stomach. I picked up my pace, eager to move out of that particular section of the forest. According to the crude map, the Holloway place should be situated near the headwaters of a small, unnamed creek that fed into the larger Black Creek miles to the south. After another hour of struggling through the undergrowth, I heard it, the faint murmur of moving water. Hope surged. Following the sound, I descended into another hollow, this one steeper than the others. The ground grew damper, the trees larger, older. Gnarled oaks draped with moss stood alongside towering hemlocks. And there was the creek, shallow, clear water tumbling over smooth, dark stones. I knelt by the bank, splashing cold water on my face, checking my copied map again. If this was the right creek, the ruin shouldn't be far upstream. The map showed it situated on a small rise, just north of the creek bend. I took a long drink from my water bottle, glancing at my watch. It was later than I thought. Nearly 4 p.m. The sun was already sinking lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows through the trees. I had maybe an hour and a half of good light left, max. Enough time to find the place, get some initial photos, and then I'd have to decide hike out in the dusk and dark, or find a defensible spot to camp, which I hadn't really planned for. The thought of spending a night out here, especially after that feeling of being watched, wasn't appealing. Steeling myself, I started walking upstream, following the creek's winding path. The terrain here was slightly easier, the undergrowth less dense near the water. 10 minutes later, I saw it. Not the cabin itself, but the first sign of human habitation. A low, crumbling stone wall, almost completely swallowed by moss and vines, running parallel to the creek before angling up the slope to my right. My heart leaped. This had to be it. An old property line marker, perhaps part of an animal enclosure. I left the creek bank and started climbing the gentle slope, pushing through ferns and saplings. The feeling of anticipation was now mixed with a growing sense of something else. Trepidation, reverence. The air here felt different. Still heavy, carrying an almost palpable sense of age and isolation. It felt like trespassing, not just on land, but on memory, on sorrow. Then, through a gap in the trees, I saw it, partially obscured by tangled branches and the encroaching forest, but unmistakable. The dark, weathered timbers of a log cabin. It stood on a small, relatively flat clearing on the rise, silhouetted against the fading light filtering through the canopy. It was smaller than I'd imagined, low, roofed, and squat. One corner of the roof had collapsed inwards, leaving a gaping hole. The single window I could see was a black, empty square, like a vacant eye socket. No door was visible from my angle, just the rough, hewn logs, darkened by a century of rain and snow. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, maybe 30 yards away, hidden behind the trunk of a massive, ancient-looking oak. My breath caught in my throat. The Holloway place. After all the stories, the speculation, the difficult hike, here it was. Silent, waiting. The clearing itself was unnaturally clear compared to the surrounding woods, carpeted not with leaves, but with short, sickly, looking grass and patches of bare earth, despite the season. A few gnarled, skeletal apple trees, long dead, stood like twisted sculptures near the cabin. There was no sign of recent passage, no broken twigs or footprints in the damp soil. Only the cabin, standing in profound, lonely silence. I raised my camera, the heavy lens feeling reassuring in my hands. I zoomed in, focusing on the dark window, the decaying logs, the gaping hole in the roof. Through the viewfinder, the scene looked even more desolate, more haunting. I took a few shots, the click of the shutter sounding obscenely loud in the quiet. But I knew I couldn't just stand here. The whole point was to get closer, to explore, to document. Steeling my nerves, telling myself it was just an old, abandoned building, I took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the oak tree into the clearing. The moment I did, a shiver traced its way down my spine, entirely unrelated to the cooling afternoon air. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger this time. Intense. It felt like unseen eyes were fixed on me from the dark window of the cabin, from the deeper shadows between the trees, encircling the clearing. The silence seemed to deepen, pressing in on my ears. I took another step, then another, my boots making soft thuds on the damp earth. My gaze was locked on the cabin, specifically on that black, empty window. Half expecting to see a face, a movement, anything. There was nothing. Just darkness. I was halfway across the clearing when I heard it. Faint, almost carried away, by the breeze that had suddenly sprung up, rustling the dead leaves, still clinging to the branches overhead. It sounded like a child crying. The sound, thin and reedy like a distressed infant's cry, hung in the air for only a moment, before being snatched away by the same gust of wind. Carried it. I froze halfway across the clearing, my blood running cold. Every nerve ending screamed. Had I really heard that? Or was it just the wind whistling through a gap in the cabin walls? Or the branches scraping together overhead? Auditory pareidolia, the brain finding patterns in random noise. It had to be. There couldn't be a child out here, miles from anywhere, especially not near this place. I strained my ears, holding my breath, listening so hard my eardrums seemed to throb. Silence flooded back in, thick and absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. The clearing felt suddenly colder, the shadows deeper. The sense of being watched, now almost suffocating. The black rectangle of the window seemed to bore into me. Logically, rationally, I knew I should turn around. Hike back the way I came fast, and not stop until I hit the logging road. Put as much distance between myself end this place as possible before nightfall completely consumed the woods. Every instinct honed by generations of ancestors who knew better than to investigate strange noises in dark places was screaming at me to flee. But I didn't. Part of it was the stubbornness that had brought me this far. The refusal to be scared off by what? The wind. My own imagination. Part of it was the photographer's drive, the lure of the unknown, the story, and maybe, just maybe, a morbid, unsettling curiosity had taken root. What if it wasn't the wind? The legend of the Holloway children? No, that was ridiculous. Ghost stories, campfire tales. Still, my hand tightened its grip on my camera, the cold metal a small comfort. I forced my legs to move, covering the remaining distance to the cabin with slow, deliberate steps, scanning the tree line, the cabin walls, that damn window. Nothing moved. Up close, the cabin looked even more decrepit. The logs were deeply weathered, scarred by decades of harsh winters and humid summers. Wide cracks ran between them, chinked originally with mud and moss, now mostly crumbled away, leaving dark gaps. I could smell it now, the pervasive odor of damp, rotting wood, mingled with the earthy scent of mildew, and something else, something faintly unpleasant, vaguely metallic, like old blood or rust. I circled cautiously towards where I assumed the front door would be. It was there, or what was left of it, hanging crookedly from one rusted hinge, splintered and partially caved inwards, blocked by a tangle of fallen roof timbers and debris from the collapsed corner overhead. There was no getting in that way without making a serious racket and risking further collapse. I continued around the side, peering into the single dark window I'd seen from the clearing. The glass was long gone, leaving only a black void. I shone my flashlight beam inside, cutting through the gloom. Dust motes danced furiously in the shaft of light. I could see the vague shapes of furniture, within perhaps a table, overturned chairs. Everything coated in a thitter of gray dust and cobwebs, draped like macabre decorations. The beam caught something reflective deep inside, maybe glass or metal. I couldn't tell. The air inside looked heavy, stagnant. Further around, on the back wall, facing deeper into the woods, I found another window, this one smaller, higher up, and miraculously, mostly intact, though clouded with grime. Below it, near the foundation stones, was something else. A low, angled set of wooden doors, almost completely covered by dead leaves and dirt. A cellar entrance. One of the doors had rotted through, leaving a dark opening about the size of a small dog. This seemed like the most likely point of entry, albeit an uninviting one. Crouching down, I cleared away the wet leaves and loose soil. The remaining wood of the intact door was soft and punky. I gave it a tentative push. It groaned loudly in protest, the sound echoing slightly in the enclosed space beyond, but it gave way, swinging inwards with a shower of rotten wood particles and dust. A wave of cold, musty air, smelling strongly of damp earth and something else. Something acrid, like spoiled meat left too long, washed over me. Bile rose in my throat. Okay, deep breaths. It's just a root cellar in an abandoned cabin. Of course it smells bad. Animals probably got trapped down there and died over the years. That's all it is. Flashlight held forward like a weapon. I hesitated for only a second before lowering myself feet, first through the opening, my boots landing softly on a packed earth floor. I crouched just inside, sweeping the light around the small space. It was a shallow cellar, maybe 5 feet high, dug directly out of the earth. The walls shored up crudely with stones. Empty wooden shelves lined one wall, coated in dust and cobwebs. The floor was uneven dirt. In the center, a rough wooden pillar supported the main floor beams above. Nothing else. No dead animals, no source for the putrid smell, which seemed fainter down here. Paradoxically, maybe it was coming from the main cabin level. Looking up, I saw rough, hewn floorboards forming the ceiling. Towards the front of the cabin, a set of crude wooden steps, steep and narrow, led upwards into darkness. This must be the way into the main living area. Taking another steadying breath, I started up the steps, testing each one before putting my full weight on it. They creaked alarmingly, but held. As my head rose above the level of the main floor, the smell hit me again, stronger now. Decay, mildew, dust, and that underlying foulness. I emerged into the main room of the cabin. It was larger than it appeared from outside, but still oppressively small. A single space, perhaps 15 by 20 feet. Light filtered dimly through the grimy windows and the gaping hole in the roof corner, illuminating a scene of utter desolation. Dust lay thick as snow on every surface. Cobwebs stretched between furniture legs and ceiling beams like grotesque streamers. An overturned wooden table lay near the center of the room. Simple chairs were scattered around it, one smashed into pieces. Against the far wall stood a large stone fireplace, its hearth filled with charred wood and debris. To one side of it, a rusted cookstove leaned precariously. Scattered across the floor were remnants of domestic life, frozen in time and decay. Tin plates, a broken ceramic jug. Unrecognizable scraps of fabric that might once have been clothes or curtains. I swept my flashlight beam across the room, the powerful LED cutting sharply through the gloom. My boots crunched softly on a gritty layer of dust and debris covering the floorboards. The silence was profound, broken only by my own movements and the faint whisper of wind through the cracks in the walls. Then I saw it. Near the hearth, half hidden under a piece of fallen plaster, was a small, worn leather shoe. A child's shoe, old-fashioned, buttoned up the side. My light lingered on it. Seeing it there, tangible proof of the children who had lived and vanished here, sent a fresh wave of chills down my spine. The crying sound echoed in my memory. Was it just the wind? Raising my camera, I started taking pictures, the flash momentarily banishing the shadows, revealing stark details. The texture of the dust, the grain of the wood, the rust on the stove. In the harsh glare of the flash, I noticed dark stains on the floorboards near the overturned table. Old, faded, but definitely there. Could be anything, I told myself. Spilled food, water damage, animal leavings. But my mind immediately went to darker possibilities. I moved deeper into the room, stepping carefully around the debris. In one corner, almost hidden in shadow, was a low shape. A wooden cradle, crudely made, lying on its side as if violently knocked over. Empty. My flashlight beam traced the rough carvings on its side, simple floral patterns, clumsily executed. Suddenly, a loud creak echoed from above. I froze, flashlight beam snapping upwards towards the ceiling. There was no second floor, just a low attic space, or sleeping loft through gaps in the rough plank, ceiling and the hole where the roof had collapsed. More debris shifted, showering down dust and small particles. Just the house settling, I told myself. Old wood wind. But my heart was hammering against my ribs again. I forced myself to keep exploring, moving towards the back wall where I thought I'd seen shelves, or a cupboard through the window. It was a simple pantry area. Shelves mostly collapsed, littered with broken jars and rusted tins. But tucked away on a higher, intact shelf, I found something else. A small, cloth-bound book. Not a Bible. The cover was plain, dark, almost black, the title long since faded or worn away. I reached for it carefully. The cloth felt strange, almost greasy, under the layer of dust. I opened it. The pages were brittle, yellowed, and stuck together in places. Much of the writing was illegible, faded or blurred by water damage. But I could make out fragments, written in a cramped, spidery hand. Dates from the early 1920s. Mentions of sleepless nights. Strange noises in the woods, prayers for protection. One fragmented sentence leaped out at me. The woods watch. It whispers, knows the children's names. Another passage barely legible near the back. Offerings not enough. It wants more. Always more. Martha fears, sees things in the trees. The soil is wrong here. My hand trembled as I held the book. This wasn't just a record of hardship. It felt like a descent into paranoia, or worse, a documentation of something genuinely malevolent. Was this Jedediah Holloway's journal? A sudden, sharp scratching sound came from inside the wall right next to me. I jumped back, dropping the book. It landed with a soft thud in the dust. The scratching stopped. Just a mouse. I whispered, my voice hoarse. Or a squirrel. But it had sounded too rhythmic, too deliberate. And it had come from inside the solid log wall. My flashlight beam darted around the room, probing the shadows. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of decay, and that other, fuller scent. The silence pressed down, broken only by the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I bent down to retrieve the journal, my eyes scanning the floor. And then I saw them. Partially obscured by the overturned table, leading from the area near the hearth towards the cellar steps I'd come up. Footprints. In the thick dust. Not my boot prints. These were smaller, oddly shaped. Barefoot. No, not quite. The edges were too sharp in places, the pattern indistinct, but definitely not human. And they looked fresh. As if whatever made them had disturbed the century. Old dust very, very recently. My breath hitched. I wasn't alone in the cabin. Or at least, I hadn't been. Then, the sound came again. Not from outside this time. Not from the wind. It was close. Chillingly close. A soft, whimpering sob. Like a very young child. Trying to stifle its cries. It seemed to emanate from the darkest corner of the room, near the collapsed section of the roof, where shadows lay thickest. My flashlight beam shot towards the sound. The crying stopped abruptly. The beam illuminated nothing but broken timbers, fallen plaster, and thick, undisturbed cobwebs. But I had heard it, clear as day, and it was inside, with me. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. Every instinct screamed Gtiot. Rationality, curiosity, the desire for photos all evaporated in an instant, replaced by raw, primal fear. I started, backing away slowly towards the cellar steps, my flashlight beam sweeping frantically across the room. My camera dangling forgotten from its strap around my neck. My boots crunched too loudly in the silence. The dark windows seemed to watch me. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen, coalesce. I reached the top of the cellar stairs, never taking my eyes off the main room. I took one step down, then another backwards, my hand fumbling for the rough wooden railing.
Slom.
A sound like a door being violently thrown shut echoed through the cabin, seemingly from the front, near the blocked main entrance. But there was no intact door there. It was followed by a heavy, scraping sound across the floorboards above my head. I didn't wait to hear more. I scrambled down the remaining steps into the cellar, nearly falling in my haste. My flashlight beam bounced wildly off the earthen walls. I lunged for the low opening leading outside, the opening I'd come through. Just as I reached it, plunging my head and shoulders out into the cool, dusky air of the clearing, I heard it from the top of the cellar stairs behind me. Not crying this time. A giggle. High, pitched, horribly distorted, and utterly devoid of mirth. It echoed in the small cellar space, multiplying, surrounding me. And then, a voice, barely more than a whisper, but clear and cold as ice, seemed to slither directly into my ear. "Don't leave. Play with us." That whisper, cold and intimate, slithering directly into my ear, shattered the last vestiges of my composure. It wasn't just a sound. It felt like a physical violation. Icy fingers tracing the shell of my ear, promising horrors disguised as play. The giggle that followed, high and distorted, echoing in the cramped cellar space, was the snapping point. Primal terror, pure and undiluted, surged through me, bypassing thought entirely. I didn't just crawl out of the cellar opening, I erupted, propelled by a force beyond conscious control. My shoulder hit the damp earth hard, and I scrambled forward on hands and knees, desperate to put distance between myself and that low, dark opening in the foundation. The cool, dusky air of the clearing hit my face, but it brought no relief, only the heightened awareness of my exposure. I staggered to my feet, legs shaking violently, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. My instinct was to run, blindly, anywhere away from the cabin. But some shred of awareness, some need to know, made me risk a glance back over my shoulder. The cabin stood silent, seemingly unchanged, silhouetted against the rapidly darkening sky. The cellar opening was a black rectangle near the ground. As I watched, heart hammering against my ribs, so hard I felt it in my throat, the intact half of the rotten cellar door swung slowly, silently shut from the inside, closing off the darkness within. no wind. Nothing could have pushed it. That was all the confirmation I needed. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't the house settling. Something was in there. Something that whispered and giggled and shut doors. Something that had left those strange, fresh tracks in the century, old dust. The clearing, which had seemed merely unsettling before, now felt actively hostile. The wind suddenly picked up, swirling dead leaves and dust around my feet in frantic eddies. It moaned through the gaps in the cabin walls and hissed through the skeletal branches of the dead apple. Trees, which seemed to writhe like arthritic fingers clawing at the sky. The feeling of being watched intensified tenfold, no longer just from the cabin, but from the dense wall of trees surrounding the clearing on all sides. Eyes everywhere. Then, the crying sound returned. Not the faint whimper I'd heard before, but multiple instances of it, overlapping, seeming to come from the left, then the right, then directly behind me. Thin, reedy sobs mixing with those horrible, high-pitched giggles. It was a disorienting, terrifying cacophony designed to unnerve, to paralyze. Play with us? No, I wasn't going to be paralyzed. Fueled by a fresh spike of adrenaline, I turned and ran. Wah. Not back towards the faint path. Followed the creek that felt too close to the cabin, but plunging directly into the thickest part of the woods, on the opposite side of a clearing, hoping to loop back around eventually, putting the Holloway place squarely behind me. Instantly, the forest seemed to fight back. Thorny vines, the briars that gave this wood its name, snaring at my clothes, tearing fabric and scratching my skin. Low hanging branches slapped at my face. The uneven ground, hidden beneath a thick layer of leaves, threatened to twist my ankles with every step. The dim, filtered light was fading fast, turning the woods into a confusing maze of gray trunks and deepening shadows. Behind me, I heard it, a distinct crash, as something large pushed through undergrowth at the edge of the clearing, followed by the rapid snapping of twigs and branches. It was moving fast, faster than a man should be able to move through this terrain. I didn't dare look back. I just ran harder, fueled by the image of those fresh tracks in the dust, the memory of that icy whisper. The sounds of pursuit stayed with me, sometimes falling back slightly as I navigated a particularly dense thicket, sometimes drawing alarmingly close as I struggled up a steep incline. It wasn't the sound of human footsteps. It was heavier, yet somehow quicker. A shuffling, scraping gait mixed with powerful, breaking strides. Plural. It was hard to tell over the roar of blood in my ears and my own ragged breathing. Panic clawed at my throat, making it hard to draw breath. My lungs burned. Sweat drenched my clothes despite the cool air, chilling me to the bone. My sense of direction dissolved completely. Was I heading west, towards the logging road? Or deeper into the endless sprawl of briarwood? The trees all looked the same, menacing shapes in the gloom. Every shadow seemed to writhe with movement. Every gust of wind carried whispers that sounded chillingly like my name. Ethan. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder while scrambling over a fallen log. Darkness. Trees. and movement, a pale shape flitting between trunks, unnaturally fast, unnaturally fluid. Gone before I could focus. Was it real? Or just my panicked mind playing tricks in the failing light? The crying and giggling sounds persisted, intermittent now, seeming to flank me, mocking my flight. Comply, eh? Lost. Stay with us forever. The voices were thin, childlike, yet held an undertone of ancient malice that curdled my blood. It was psychological warfare, designed to break me down, make me give up. My camera, bouncing heavily against my chest, became a liability. During a particularly clumsy stumble down a short, steep bank, the strap caught on a root. I fell hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The camera slammed against a rock, the lens cracking with a sickening crunch. Pain flared in my knee, but the sounds of pursuit, closer now, just behind the crest of the bank, spurred me back to my feet. I ripped the broken camera free, letting it fall, abandoning the very reason I'd come out here. Documentation didn't matter now. Only survival. I lurched forward, favoring my injured knee, the pain a dull throb beneath the sharp stab of fear. I fumbled at my belt for the bear spray. My fingers closed around the cold metal canister. Some small, defiant part of me thought, maybe this will stop it. Maybe it's just a bear, a cougar, something explainable. But I knew, deep down, that it wasn't. The voices, the giggle, the feeling of unnatural presence. Bear spray wasn't going to help. Still, I gripped the canister tightly, my thumb on the trigger, ready to use it if I had to. Better than nothing. The woods grew darker, the trees thicker. I was running almost blind now, guided more by instinct and the desperate need for distance. The sounds behind me seemed to merge into one continuous, rustling, scraping presence. It felt like it was gaining. Suddenly, I burst through a dense wall of rhododendron into a small, unexpected pocket of relative openness. Not a clearing, but an area where the trees thinned slightly, centered around a cluster of large, moss-covered boulders. For a split second, I thought I'd found a place to hide, to catch my breath. Then I heard it, directly behind me, no longer muffled by Denthing's woods. A wet, guttural breathing sound, accompanied by a soft, rhythmic thump, scrape, thump, scrape. Time seemed to slow down, against every instinct screaming at me to keep running. I stopped. I turned. It was maybe 20 feet away, partially obscured by the gloom and the trunk of a thick oak. What I saw wasn't clear, not in the traditional sense. My mind couldn't seem to fully process it, like looking at a distorted image through water. Pale, tall, but hunched, its limbs seeming too long, bent at unnatural angles. No discernible clothes, just pale, mottled skin or maybe tight. Fitting hide, stretched taut over sharp bones. It wasn't the figure itself that was the most terrifying, but the emptiness where its face should have been a smooth, shadowed depression. Yet somehow, I felt its gaze locked onto me. And from that faceless head came the low, wet breathing. The thump, scrape sound came from one of its lower limbs, which dragged uselessly, disturbingly, behind it as it moved with a jerky, predatory gait. It took a step towards me, raising one elongated arm. Fingers tipped with something dark and sharp splaying outwards. The bear spray felt suddenly, laughably inadequate. A strangled cry escaped my lips. I didn't aim the spray. I didn't think. I just turned and ran again, abandoning the relative openness for the treacherous embrace of the dense woods beyond the boulders. I scrambled over the rocks, ignoring the sharp pain in my hands as they scraped against the rough, mossy surfaces. Behind me, there was a shriek. Not human. A high-pitched, frustrated, enraged sound that echoed through the trees, raising the hairs on the back of my neck. The heavy, scraping pursuit resumed, faster now, crashing through the undergrowth with renewed violence. I ran without thought, without direction, pure instinct driving me. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision, tears of terror, pain, and utter despair. Briars tore at me, rocks bruised me, exhaustion weighed me down like lead. But the sound of that shriek, the image of that pale, faceless thing, propelled me forward. How long I ran, I don't know. Minutes, an hour. Time lost all meaning. The woods became an endless, claustrophobic nightmare. My lungs felt ready to burst. My injured knee screamed with every jarring step. Just when I felt I couldn't take another step, that I would collapse, and I would collapse, and let whatever was chasing me take me. I stumbled out of the trees and onto something different. Not solid ground, but mud. Thick, sucking mud. I had run into a swampy area, likely near the headwaters of another creek, and across the expanse of dark water and cypress knees, barely visible in the near. Total darkness now. I saw it. A light. Faint, flickering, but definitely a light. Hope, fragile and unexpected, flickered within me. A house. A camp. Civilization. But even as that hope sparked, another sound reached me, cutting through the swampy silence. Not the sound of pursuit this time. It was closer, coming from the edge of the swamp, just to my right. Soft weeping. A child's desolate sobbing, heartbroken and utterly lost. And it was right there, in the darkness, just beyond my sight. I froze at the edge of the sucking mud, caught between the unknown light across the swamp and the heartbreaking, terrifying sound beside me in the darkness. The woods behind me were silent now. The pursuit had stopped, or paused, listening, waiting. Frozen at the edge of the black, sucking mire, I was trapped. Behind me lay the oppressive darkness of Briarwood, where the scraping, shuffling thing that had hunted me might still be listening, waiting. To my right, emanating from the impenetrable shadows beneath dripping cypress trees, was that heartbreaking, utterly terrifying sound, a child's lost weeping. It felt like a lure, a siren song leading not to safety, but to the same fate as the Holloway children. And ahead, across the treacherous expanse of the swamp, flickered that single, enigmatic point of light. Salvation, or just another layer of this nightmare. Staying put was impossible. The silence from behind me felt charged, temporary. Giving in to the lure of the crying felt like suicide. A deliberate step into the jaws of whatever horror resided here. The light was the only unknown that offered even a sliver of potential escape. It was a gamble, perhaps a foolish one, but it was the only path that didn't feel like certain doom. Taking a ragged breath that tasted of mud and fear, I ignored the chilling sobs. Nearby, trying desperately to convince myself it was just another trick of the wind, another auditory hallucination, like the first cry back at the cabin, and stepped into the swamp. The mud immediately sucked at my boots, cold and greedy, threatening to pull me down. The water was deeper than I expected, icy cold, quickly soaking my jeans up to my thighs. Progress was agonizingly slow. Each step was a struggle, pulling my foot free from the viscous muck, trying to find purchase on submerged roots or firmer ground, all while navigating by the distant, flickering pinpoint of light. My failing flashlight beam, used sparingly to conserve battery, cut a weak swath through the oppressive darkness. It illuminated murky water swirling with sediment, skeletal fingers of cypress knees reaching up like drowned hands, and, once, disturbingly, a pair of small, reflective eyes that vanished beneath the surface before I could identify their owner. Insects buzzed incessantly around my head, drawn to the light and the sweat on my skin. The air hung thick and humid, smelling of decay, stagnant water, and fear. Behind me, the crying sound seemed to follow. Along the bank for a while, a faint, mournful counterpoint to my struggles, before finally fading into the cacophony of swamp. Noises, the croaking of frogs, the splash of unseen creatures, the sighing of the wind through the Spanish moss. Or maybe it hadn't faded. Maybe I just couldn't hear it anymore over the pounding of my own blood in my ears. It felt like hours passed in that black water, though it was probably less than one. My injured knee throbbed relentlessly. My muscles screamed from the exertion. Twice, I stumbled into deeper pockets, the cold water rising to my chest, panic flaring as I fought for footing. Finally, utterly exhausted, caked in mud, shivering uncontrollably, I felt firmer ground beneath my feet. I hauled myself up onto a low bank, collapsing onto a carpet of damp pine needles, gasping for air. After a few moments, I pushed myself up and looked towards the light. It was closer now, maybe 50 yards away, shining from the single window of a small, dark structure nestled amongst the pines, a simple, unpainted wooden shack. A hunting cabin, an old trapper's outpost. Hope, raw and desperate, surged through me again. Someone was here. Help. Safety. I approached cautiously, every sense still on high alert. The shack looked old but reasonably solid. The light inside came from a gas lantern. Its flame turned low, casting a warm, flickering glow through the grimy window pane. The door was slightly ajar. I listened intently. Silence. No voices, no movement. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse, cracking. "Is anyone there?" Only the whisper of the wind through the pines answered. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open wider. It creaked softly. The interior was small and Spartan. A single metal-framed bunk with a thin, stained mattress stood against one wall. A small wooden table and a single chair were opposite it. Shelves held a meager collection of dusty tins, a couple of chipped enamel cups, and a coil of rope. The gas lantern sat on the table, hissing softly. The air smelled of damp wood, stale coffee, and lantern fuel. It felt recently occupied, yet deserted, as if someone had just stepped out moments before. Overcome by exhaustion and the sudden, albeit precarious, sense of shelter. I stumbled inside and sank onto the chair, burying my face in my trembling hands. I was out of the swamp, out of the immediate pursuit. The solid walls, however flimsy, felt like a fortress compared to the terrifying openness of the woods. I took inventory of my injuries: scraped hands, bruised ribs, a throbbing knee that was already starting to stiffen, countless scratches from the briars. Nothing seemed broken, thankfully. I splashed some water from my nearly empty bottle onto my face, trying to clear my head. The silence outside pressed in. No crying. No scraping footsteps. Maybe I had lost it. Maybe whatever was out there couldn't or wouldn't cross the swamp. Maybe I was finally safe, at least for now. Then my eyes fell on the floor near the bunk. In the lantern light, I saw them clearly. Boot prints. Relatively fresh, visible in the thin layer of dust and dirt on the floorboards. Heavy, treaded work boots. And they weren't mine. My own muddy, ragged sneakers left entirely different marks near the doorway. Someone else had been here recently. Where had they gone? Why leave the lantern burning? A cold dread began to seep back into me, displacing the relief. I scanned the small space again. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the table beside the lantern. Cold now. A crumpled map lay beside it, not a printed one, but hand-drawn, crude, depicting creek systems and ridges I didn't recognize. Was this the cabin of another explorer? A hunter? Or someone else? A floorboard creaked just outside the door. I froze, every muscle tensing. My head snapped towards the sound. Silence. Had I imagined it? Was it just the shack settling? Then, a soft scratching sound started, low down on the outside of the door, like fingernails dragging lightly across the wood. Scritch. Scrape. My blood turned to ice. It had found me. Or it had been waiting here all along. The light wasn't salvation, it was bait. This shack wasn't a refuge, it was a trap, just like the cabin. Panic surged anew. Hot and suffocating. I scrambled backwards, knocking over the chair with a clatter. My eyes darted around the small space, looking for a weapon, another exit. There was none. Just the one door, where the scratching continued, growing slightly louder, more insistent. And the single grimy window. Then, the crying started again. Right outside the window this time. The desolate, heartbroken sobs of a child, punctuated by those awful, high-pitched, mirthless giggles. Let us in. So cold, play with us. Ethan, play. No. Not again. I wasn't going to be cornered. I wasn't going to end up like the Holloways, or whoever owned those boot prints on the floor. With a strangled yell born of sheer terror, I lunged for the door. Not to open it, but to brace it. I threw my weight against the rough planks, just as something heavy thudded against the outside. The wood groaned but held. The scratching became frantic. Gouging sounds now, accompanied by low, guttural snarls mixing with the children's voices. I knew I couldn't hold it for long. My only chance was the window. It was small, high up, but maybe, just maybe, ignoring the cacophony at the door, I scrambled onto the table, nearly upsetting the lantern. I fumbled with the window latch, rusted, stiff. Outside, the crying and giggling reached a fever pitch. A heavier blow struck the door, making the whole shack shudder. With a final desperate wrench, the latch gave way. I shoved the window outwards. It opened onto blackness. Without hesitating, I threw myself through the opening. It was a tight squeeze. Splintered wood tore at my jacket and skin. I landed hard on the soft, damp ground outside, the impact jarring my already injured knee. I pushed myself up instantly, ignoring the pain, and ran. I ran without looking back, plunging once more into the unforgiving darkness of Briarwood Forest. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. Away. Just away from the shack, from the voices, from the thing at the door. The rest of the night is a blur of terror, exhaustion, and blind navigation. I pushed through endless thickets, stumbled through unseen creeks, climbed slopes that felt like mountains. The sounds of direct pursuit didn't resume, but the feeling of being watched, of being stalked from a distance, never left me. Every shadow seemed to hold a pale, faceless shape. Every rustle of leaves sounded like scraping footsteps. The woods themselves felt alive, malevolent, testing my endurance, waiting for me to falter. I don't know how, but I kept moving, driven by a primal survival instinct. Sometime before dawn, the oppressive darkness began to soften into a deep, bruised gray. The air grew colder, sharper, and then I heard it faint, distant, but unmistakable. The barking of a dog. Hope, real this time, lent strength to my failing legs. I pushed towards the sound, stumbling, falling, getting up again. The trees began to thin slightly. I saw a flicker of movement through the branches, a deer, bounding away. A blessedly normal sight. Then, I saw a line of rusted barbed wire, an old fence line. I followed it, tears of relief welling in my eyes. The fence led me to a wider track, overgrown but clearly man-made. A logging trail. And then, finally, as the first rays of the sun pierced the canopy, painting the leaves in weak, watery light, I saw it. Through the trees, down a muddy embankment. My beat, up Tacoma. Never had anything looked so beautiful. I half ran, half fell down the embankment, fumbling for my keys with numb, shaking fingers. The relief that washed over me as the engine caught, sputtering to life, was indescribable. I slammed the truck into reverse, spun it around, and drove. I didn't slow down until the muddy track met the gravel logging road, and the gravel met the paved county route, putting miles of asphalt between me and the whispering depths of Briarwood. It's been 6 months since that night. The physical scars have mostly healed the scratches, the bruises, the torn ligaments in my knee. But the other scars, they remain. I sold my camera gear. The thought of looking through a lens into forgotten places now fills me with a paralyzing dread. I moved out of my apartment near the edge of town, away from the tree line. Being near woods, even manicured parks, triggers a cold sweat, a tightness in my chest. The smell of damp earth, of autumn leaves, brings it all rushing back. The cabin, the crying, the faceless thing in the gloom. Sleep offers little escape. Nightmares haunt me, fragmented images of decaying logs. That empty cradle, the cellar door swinging shut, pale, limbs moving unnaturally through trees. And always, always, The sound of children crying and giggling in the darkness, whispering my name. Sometimes, late at night, in the sterile quiet of my new apartment downtown, I think I hear it. A faint scratching at the door. A child's whimper seemingly coming from the hallway. The distinct feeling of being watched, even with the blinds drawn tight. My logical mind tells me it's trauma, my nerves playing tricks, the city settling. But then I remember the journal entry. The woods knows the children's names bio. And I remember the whisper, cold and clear as ice, right beside my ear. Don't leave. Play with us. I left Briarwood behind me. But I don't think it ever truly let me go. Some places hold on to you. Some echoes never fade. And I know, for certain, that chills me deeper than any autumn wind, that whatever dwells in the heart of those woods remembers me. And it waits.